I wasn't planning to share this with anyone, let alone strangers on the internet, but the truth has been eating away at me. Maybe putting it all out here will give me some clarity, or at least help someone else avoid the mistake of trusting the wrong person too much. My wife, Emily, and I were the couple everyone envied, or so I thought. We'd been together for nearly a decade, married for 7 years, and in all that time, I never questioned her loyalty. She was smart, charming, and the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. I felt lucky to have her by my side, too lucky maybe. A couple of weeks ago, she casually mentioned she'd been invited to an exclusive party by one of her friends from work. I didn't think much of it at first. She went to these things occasionally, and I always encouraged her to have a social life outside of our marriage. But this time felt different. She was unusually excited, almost jittery, as she described it. "It's nothing big," she said, brushing her hair in the mirror. "Just a little get-together with some colleagues, networking and stuff." "Sounds fun," I replied, glancing up from my laptop. "Do I know anyone who'll be there?" She hesitated just for a moment. "No, just people from the office. It's nothing you'd be interested in." That hesitation planted the first seed of doubt in my mind. Emily wasn't the type to keep secrets, or at least I didn't think she was, but something about the way she avoided eye contact made my chest tighten. I let it go, chalking it up to my imagination. Maybe I was overthinking things. After all, she had never given me a reason not to trust her. The night of the party, she spent more time getting ready than usual. She slipped into a sleek black dress I hadn't seen before, paired it with heels that made her legs look impossibly long, and dabbed on perfume that lingered even after she left. She looked stunning, almost too stunning for a casual work event. "Emily, are you sure this isn't a black tie affair?" I joked, trying to keep it light. She laughed, but it sounded forced. "No, it's just a little fancy. You know how these things are." When she kissed me goodbye, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I watched her walk out the door, feeling an odd mix of pride and unease. That was the last normal moment we shared. Hours passed, and I tried to distract myself. I flipped through channels on the TV, played a couple of games on my phone, and even considered going to bed early, but that nagging feeling wouldn't let up. Something about tonight felt off. At 10:30, I decided to check her social media, not that I expected to find anything incriminating. It was just a way to calm my overactive mind. But her accounts were quiet. No posts, no stories, no updates. Unusual for Emily, who loved sharing snippets of her life online. That's when the idea hit me. One of her coworkers, a guy named Jake, had tagged her in a photo at another party a few weeks back. I clicked on his profile and scrolled through his recent posts, and there it was, a photo from tonight. A group of people laughing and drinking in what looked like a lavish penthouse. My heart stopped when I spotted Emily in the background, standing a little too close to a man I didn't recognize. He had his arm around her waist, and she wasn't pulling away. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe it was innocent, maybe it was just a friendly gesture. But the longer I stared at that photo, the harder it was to breathe. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I grabbed my keys and drove to the address Jake had tagged. My hands trembled on the steering wheel the entire way there, a mix of anger, fear, and adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I knew I had to see for myself. When I arrived, the sound of laughter and music spilled out of the apartment. I climbed the stairs, my stomach churning with every step, and then, through the slightly open door, I saw her. Emily was wrapped around that same man, her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in months. They were laughing, whispering, completely oblivious to the world around them. She knew I was watching when I stepped into the room. Her eyes widened, and her smile vanished. For a second, time seemed to freeze. Then, without saying a word, I turned and walked out, leaving her to the party she had chosen over me. She thought I was heartbroken, and maybe I was, but more than anything, I was furious. As I drove home, a plan started to form in my mind. If she wanted to destroy our marriage, I wasn't going to make it easy for her. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with questions and emotions I couldn't quite pin down. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? Was I the last person to see the cracks in what I thought was a perfect marriage? By the time I pulled into our driveway, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I sat there in the dark, staring at our house, the house we'd built together, the one filled with memories that now felt like a cruel joke. Emily's betrayal wasn't just a personal attack. It was a dismantling of everything I thought I knew. And yet, a strange sense of calm started to wash over me. This wasn't going to break me. If anything, it gave me clarity. Inside, I poured myself a drink, sat down at the dining room table, and started taking notes. Revenge wasn't something I had ever entertained before, but tonight was different. I wasn't going to lash out or make a scene. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions. Every lie she told, every deceitful glance, would come back to haunt her. Around midnight, Emily came home. I heard her heels clicking on the porch, followed by the sound of her key in the lock. She stepped inside, and for a moment, she didn't notice me sitting there. She was smiling, but it wasn't the carefree, happy smile I used to love. It was the kind of smile that masks guilt. "Oh, you're still up?" she said, her voice overly casual. "Didn't think you'd wait for me." I raised my glass to her. "Just wanted to make sure you got home safe." Her eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe. She hesitated, then walked over and kissed me on the cheek. I didn't flinch, didn't give her any reason to think I knew. She didn't smell like her usual perfume anymore. It was mingled with something else, something musky and unfamiliar. "How was the party?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Good," she said too quickly. "Just a bunch of boring work talk. You know how it is." I nodded, swirling the liquid in my glass. "Glad you had fun." She didn't stay to chat, didn't even ask about my evening. Instead, she disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That's when I realized just how deep her lies went. She wasn't even trying to cover her tracks anymore. She thought I was oblivious, a fool who'd never suspect a thing. I waited until I heard her shower running before I started putting my plan into motion. The first step was simple: gather evidence. If she wanted to live a double life, I was going to make sure I had every detail documented. I'd seen enough stories online to know that a paper trail was essential, especially if things escalated to divorce. Over the next few days, I played the role of the doting husband to perfection. I didn't confront her, didn't accuse her, didn't let on that anything had changed. Meanwhile, I quietly combed through her social media, her phone records, and even her bank statements. What I found only confirmed my suspicions. There were texts, innocuous on the surface, but with enough subtext to make my stomach churn. Messages like, "Last night was amazing, can't wait to see you again." They weren't addressed to me, obviously. Then there were the late-night Venmo transactions, labeled with winking emojis and vague descriptions like, "For drinks winking faced." And finally, there were the photos, hidden in a folder on her phone that she probably thought I'd never find. Pictures of her and the man from the party, arms wrapped around each other like they were the happiest couple in the world. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut, but I kept my composure. If I reacted now, I'd lose the upper hand. No, I wanted her to keep thinking she was in control, that her lies were safe. The next weekend, she told me she had another work event to attend. This time, I didn't bother pretending I believed her. I simply smiled, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive away. Then, I followed her. I stayed a few cars back, making sure not to lose sight of her silver sedan. She drove to a boutique hotel on the other side of town, not exactly a work function venue. I parked across the street and waited. Sure enough, a few minutes later, her friend from the party showed up. They embraced in the parking lot, laughing like teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs. As they disappeared into the hotel, I snapped a few photos. The grainy images weren't perfect, but they were enough. Enough to prove she'd lied. Enough to start unraveling the web of deceit she'd spun around me. By the time she got home that night, I had already backed up everything, texts, photos, receipts, onto a secure drive. I'd even started drafting an email to a divorce attorney, laying out the situation in cold, clinical detail. She didn't suspect a thing. She walked through the door, kissed me on the forehead, and asked if I wanted to order takeout. I smiled and said sure. But in my mind, I was already a dozen steps ahead. This wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. This was about making her regret every choice she'd made. And as I sat across from her at the dinner table that night, pretending to laugh at her stories, I realized something. I wasn't sad anymore. I was ready. The next morning, I woke up feeling sharper than I had in weeks. My mind was clear, my focus steady. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and every move had to be flawless. Emily might have thought she was untouchable, but that illusion was about to shatter. The The first step was setting the stage. Emily's phone habits had become predictable. She left it charging in the kitchen overnight, usually unlocked, because she thought I'd never snoop. That morning, as she showered, I slipped into the kitchen, opened her phone, and forwarded key messages and photos to my private email. By the time she came downstairs, humming like she didn't have a care in the world, her secrets were safe on my hard drive. "Morning," she chirped, grabbing her coffee. "Anything fun planned today?" I smiled. "Just a few errands." "You?" She shrugged. "Might meet up with Claire later." Claire was her go-to cover story, her coworker who conveniently never seemed to answer my calls. "Sounds nice," I said, masking the bitterness in my voice. After breakfast, I got to work. I spent hours combing through the evidence, organizing everything into a timeline that painted a crystal-clear picture of her betrayal. I also contacted a private investigator to gather anything I might have missed. If I was going to confront her, I needed to be armed with the truth, and then some. That afternoon, I took the next step in my plan. I met with a lawyer who specialized in cases like mine. Sitting in her office, surrounded by certificates and legal books, I laid everything on the table: the texts, the photos, the receipts. She listened intently, taking notes as I spoke. "Ethan," she said, leaning forward, "you've got a strong case here. If you're ready to move forward, we can ensure she doesn't see this coming." Her words fueled me. Emily thought she'd been clever, but she had no idea what I was preparing. By the time I left the office, I had a detailed plan in place and the reassurance that I was on solid legal ground. When I got home, Emily was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up and smiled, as if everything was normal. It was almost laughable. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive," I replied, and it was the truth. As I watched her laugh at something on her phone, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. She had no idea that the world she built on lies was about to come crashing down. This wasn't about revenge for me anymore. It was about justice, and I was ready to deliver it. The following week passed in a blur of quiet preparation. I continued playing the role of the oblivious husband, smiling at Emily's small talk and nodding at her excuses for late nights and work dinners. Inside, I was a storm brewing, gathering the pieces of her betrayal into an airtight case. The private investigator I hired didn't take long to deliver. Within 3 days, he handed me a folder thick with evidence: photos of Emily meeting her lover at hotels, videos of them together in intimate settings, and even recordings of their conversations. One particularly damning clip featured Emily laughing about how easy it was to keep me in the dark. I didn't even flinch as I watched it. I'd moved past heartbreak. Now I was fueled by resolve. On Thursday evening, Emily dropped another excuse about a team-building dinner. This time, I didn't follow her. I already had everything I needed. Instead, I spent the evening meticulously planning the confrontation. I printed the evidence, texts, photos, receipts, everything, and organized it neatly into a presentation. I also drafted a list of questions I planned to ask her when the moment came, questions she couldn't dodge or manipulate her way out of. By the time I finished, my hands were steady, my mind clear. When Emily returned home that night, she was wearing the same perfumed confidence she always wore after seeing him. She breezed into the living room, kissed my cheek, and flopped onto the couch with a sigh. "How was your evening?" she asked, scrolling through her phone. "Quiet," I said, suppressing a smirk. "How was your dinner?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "Good. Long, though?" Everyone was there, so it dragged a bit. I nodded, my stomach churning at her audacity. The lies came so easily to her, like second nature. I could have confronted her right then and there, but I didn't. Timing was everything, and I wanted her to be blindsided. The next morning, I made my final move. Emily had mentioned she'd be attending another work event on Saturday evening, which meant I had the perfect opportunity to set the stage while she was out. I reached out to a few of our mutual friends, people who had always seemed skeptical of her excuses but never said anything outright. I invited them over for Sunday afternoon, framing it as a casual get-together. "Just a small gathering," I told them, keeping my tone light. "It'll be nice to catch up." What I didn't tell them was that they'd be witnesses to the grand reveal. If Emily wanted to lie to my face and paint me as the fool, she could deal with the consequences in front of an audience. By the time Saturday evening rolled around, I was ready. Emily left the house with her usual flair, dressed to impress in a red dress that hugged her figure. She kissed me goodbye, completely unaware that her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. As soon as she was out the door, I finalized the preparations for Sunday. The evidence was printed and neatly placed in folders, one for each guest. A backup USB drive held digital copies in case Emily tried to deny or destroy anything. The stage was set, and there was no turning back. That night, as I sat alone in our living room, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anticipation, satisfaction, and an odd sense of calm. Emily thought she could keep playing her game, but the game was over. Sunday was coming, and so was the truth. Sunday morning arrived with an eerie stillness. Emily was still asleep when I got up, the red dress she'd worn the night before draped over the chair in our bedroom. I stared at it for a moment, my resolve solidifying. She had no idea what was coming. By noon, the house was immaculate. I set out snacks and drinks, making everything appear like an ordinary gathering. Emily, ever oblivious, seemed pleased with the effort I'd put in. "This is nice," she said, sipping her coffee. "I didn't realize you'd planned something for today. Just thought it'd be good to see everyone," I replied casually, hiding my smirk. By 2 p.m., our friends began arriving. Emily played the perfect hostess, laughing and chatting as if her world wasn't about to collapse. I watched her flit between conversations, her charm on full display. It was almost impressive how convincing she was. Almost. When everyone had settled in the living room, I cleared my throat and stood up. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. Emily smiled, oblivious, until she saw the stack of folders in my hands. Her expression flickered just for a second, but she quickly masked it with a curious tilt of her head. "What's this about, Ethan?" she asked, her voice light but wary. I took a deep breath. "I wanted to share something important with all of you," I began, my tone steady. "Something I think we all deserve to know." Emily's smile faltered. She looked around the room, her confidence beginning to crack. "Ethan, what are you doing?" I ignored her and continued. "For the past few months, I've noticed some changes in our relationship. At first, I thought it was just life getting in the way, but then I realized there was more to it." I opened one of the folders and held up the first photo. Emily and her lover in the hotel parking lot, his arm around her waist. Gasps filled the room. Emily's face turned pale as the weight of what I was doing hit her. "Ethan, stop," she hissed, her voice trembling. "We don't need to do this here." I looked her dead in the eye. "Oh, but we do." One by one, I handed out the folders. Our friends flipped through the evidence: photos, text messages, receipts, and the room buzzed with whispers of disbelief. Emily's mask shattered completely. She stood frozen, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "Is this some kind of joke?" one of our friends, Lisa, asked, her voice shaking. "Emily, tell me this isn't real." But Emily didn't respond. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then sank into the couch, burying her face in her hands. "This is insane," another friend muttered. "How could you do this, Emily?" I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "Emily made her choices. She lied to me, to all of us, and now she gets to live with the consequences." Emily finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Ethan, please, can we talk about this privately?" I shook my head. "You lost the right to privacy when you decided to betray me." The room was silent, save for Emily's quiet sobs. I didn't feel triumphant, nor did I feel pity. I felt free. For the first time in months, the weight of her lies was no longer mine to carry. After what felt like an eternity, Emily stood up, her shoulders slumped. She looked around the room, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, but her apology fell flat. No one responded. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Ethan, please, I'll do anything." I met her gaze, my expression unyielding. "You've already done enough." Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her to face the aftermath. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of our bed, letting the silence wash over me. The storm had passed, but the scars it left behind would take time to heal. This wasn't the ending I had imagined for our marriage, but it was the one we both deserved. The aftermath of the confrontation was exactly what I expected: messy, chaotic, and painfully revealing. After I left the room, the conversations downstairs grew louder, filled with anger, disbelief, and occasionally, muted attempts at comforting Emily. I didn't go back down. I had no more to say. Eventually, I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing repeatedly as our friends filtered out. Some stayed longer than others, trying to get answers from Emily, but from what I could hear, she wasn't saying much. By the time the house finally fell silent, I felt a strange sense of relief. Emily didn't come upstairs right away. When she finally did, hours later, her face was blotchy from crying, her eyes red and swollen. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, clutching a crumpled tissue in her hand. "Ethan," she started, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I didn't look up from the book I wasn't really reading. "I think we've said enough." She stepped closer, her voice desperate. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I know I've hurt you, but I can fix this. We can fix this." I finally met her gaze, my expression cold. You don't get to break something into a million pieces and then say you'll glue it back together. It doesn't work like that. Her lip quivered, and she sank onto the edge of the bed. "I don't want to lose you." I let out a humorless laugh. "Emily, you lost me the moment you decided to lie. The moment you chose someone else over me. I just didn't realize it until now." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe, but it wasn't enough to change my mind. That night, I slept in the guest room. I didn't want to be near her, didn't want to hear her tossing and turning as she tried to come to terms with what she'd done. The bed felt cold and unfamiliar, but at least I didn't have to share it with someone who had betrayed me. The next morning, Emily was already awake when I came downstairs. She was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. She looked up when she heard me and tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "I'll give you space. I'll move out for a while if that's what you want." I poured myself a cup of coffee, keeping my back to her. "That's a start." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I can stay with Claire for now." The mention of Claire almost made me laugh. I doubted her coworker had any idea how often she'd been used as a cover story, but I didn't care enough to point that out. "Fine," I said, finally turning to face her. "Take whatever you need, but don't expect me to wait around for you to figure things out." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Instead, she stood up, her movements slow and hesitant, as if she were afraid I'd stop her. I didn't. By the end of the day, Emily had packed a few bags and left. The house felt empty without her, but it was a different kind of emptiness, one that felt more like peace than loss. I spent the next few days sorting through the wreckage of our marriage. I went through photos, keepsakes, and mementos, deciding what to keep and what to toss. It was painful, but it also felt like shedding old skin, letting go of a life that no longer fit. Emily texted me a few times, apologizing and asking to talk, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to open that door again, and honestly, I wasn't sure I ever would be. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control of my own life. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else define my happiness again. The days following Emily's departure were a strange mix of liberation and grief. On one hand, the house felt lighter without her presence, as if the air itself had been cleansed of the weight of her lies. On the other hand, I couldn't help but reflect on everything we built and how easily it had all crumbled. But there was no time to wallow. I was determined to move forward, and that meant tying up the loose ends of our shared life. The first step was legal. I reached out to my lawyer, who had been waiting for my signal to proceed. By the end of the week, the divorce papers were drawn up. Every clause was carefully crafted to ensure that Emily wouldn't walk away with more than she deserved, or less than she had earned. Emily's first response was predictably emotional. She called me the moment she received the papers, her voice shaky and pleading. "Ethan, is this really necessary?" she asked. "Can't we just talk about this?" "I don't see what there is to talk about," I replied, my tone firm but calm. "You made your choices, Emily. Now we both have to live with them." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Finally," she said, "I never meant to hurt you. You have to believe me. Whether you meant to or not doesn't change the fact that you did," I said, and hung up before she could respond. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. I started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in years. The physical activity was cathartic, and the routine gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. Emily, meanwhile, seemed to be struggling. Mutual friends would occasionally drop hints about her attempts to reach out to me or her tearful confessions about how much she regretted what had happened. I didn't respond to any of her messages, and I instructed my lawyer to handle all communication on my behalf. One evening, as I was settling in with a book, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "I need to see you. Please, just once. It's important. Emily." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. If it's about the divorce, talk to my lawyer. If it's not, I don't see what there is to discuss. Her response came almost immediately. "It's not about the divorce. Please, Ethan, I just need 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I didn't know what she could possibly say that would change anything. But part of me wanted closure, or at least to see how far she would go to try to salvage what was left of our marriage. The next evening, we met at a coffee shop near the edge of town. Emily looked different, smaller somehow, like the weight of her actions had finally started to crush her. She fidgeted with her coffee cup as I sat across from her, waiting for her to speak. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've made so many mistakes." "That's putting it lightly," I said, leaning back in my chair. "What do you want, Emily?" She winced at my tone, but pressed on. "I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You can't fix what you broke, Emily. Trust isn't something you can glue back together." "I know," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "But I still love you. I always have." "Love," I repeated, my voice sharp. "You call this love? Sneaking around, lying to my face, making a fool out of me in front of our friends? That's not love, Emily. That's selfishness." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to sugarcoat things for her anymore. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her tears spilling over. "I don't know what else to say." "Then don't say anything," I said, standing up. "It's over, Emily. It's been over for a long time. You just didn't want to admit it." She reached out as if to stop me, but I stepped back. "Take care of yourself," I said, and walked away without looking back. That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. It wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of her hold on me. And as I drifted off, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. The storm had passed, and I was finally ready to start over. The days after my final meeting with Emily were quieter than I expected. There were no desperate calls, no frantic messages, no surprise appearances at my door. It was as though she had finally accepted what I already knew. There was no salvaging what we had. The peace that followed was something I hadn't felt in years. I used that time to focus on myself, something I had neglected for far too long. My mornings started at the gym, where I found a renewed sense of strength and determination. The sweat and the grind helped me work through the lingering anger, and each weight I lifted felt like a small victory over the hurt Emily had caused. Work, too, became a sanctuary. I poured my energy into new projects, earning the respect of my colleagues, and even a promotion that I hadn't been expecting. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just treading water. But the biggest change came in my personal life. I started saying yes to things I used to avoid: dinners with friends, spontaneous road trips, even a cooking class my coworker had recommended. Slowly, I began to rebuild the parts of myself that had been chipped away during my marriage. I realized that Emily hadn't just betrayed me. She had overshadowed me, made me smaller in ways I hadn't even noticed until I was free. One evening a few months later, I was invited to a casual get-together at a friend's house. At first, I hesitated, worried it might dredge up old memories. Many of the same people who had been at my confrontation with Emily would be there, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face their pity. But then I thought about how far I'd come, and how much I wanted to prove to myself, more than anyone, that I was stronger now. The night turned out to be a revelation. My friends welcomed me with open arms, their concern replaced by genuine joy at seeing me again. It felt good to laugh, to share stories, to feel like a part of something without the shadow of Emily hanging over me. It was there that I met someone new, a woman named Rachel. She wasn't flashy or overly confident like Emily had been. Instead, she had a quiet warmth that drew people in. We struck up a conversation about music, of all things, and before I knew it, we were lost in our own little world, sharing stories and laughing like old friends. When the night ended, Rachel slipped me her number, her smile shy but sincere. "Call me if you ever want to grab a coffee," she said. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost, a spark of hope. In the months that followed, Rachel and I grew closer. She wasn't just kind and funny. She was also understanding in a way that felt rare. I didn't unload my baggage onto her. This wasn't about rushing into something new. Instead, we took things slow, enjoying the simple pleasure of getting to know each other without pressure or expectation. As my life began to take shape again, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Emily's betrayal had been devastating, yes, but it had also been a catalyst. It forced me to confront the things I'd been ignoring, to rebuild myself from the ground up. One day, as I sat on my porch with Rachel, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness, the pain, the betrayal, it no longer consumed me. It had shaped me, yes, but it didn't define me. "I'm glad you came that night," I said, glancing at Rachel. She smiled, her eyes soft. "Me too." And for the first time in years, I felt like my life was truly my own again. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to write.